The creature's circulation was weak, but it still existed, a sign of its almost superhuman strength. From what I understood, its musculoskeletal system maintained its blood flow, which also explained its pale, almost ghostly complexion. The horrific malnutrition it suffered only added to its gaunt, sickly appearance. Unfortunately, my research didn't yield many breakthrough results, but there was one thing that intrigued me. I managed to extract a rare enzyme from its mouth, a substance akin to draculin, an anticoagulant found in vampire bats. As much as I hated to admit it, this thing was exactly what legends had painted it to be, a vampire. Perhaps some myths were true after all, but at that moment, none of it mattered. I was driven by a thirst for knowledge. My need to understand was insatiable. To sum it up briefly, I spent years searching for clues in ways that were morally questionable. But in those days, there was little else to hold on to. The only consolation I had was that these creatures were solitary, incapable of warning others about my pursuit of them. Then, fate intervened in the form of an obscure online post. A man seeking a willing blood donor for cash, though not for a typical blood transfusion. He wanted to drink it directly from the source if possible. It was exactly the kind of person I had been looking for. I didn't care about the money, so I volunteered. But I had no intention of letting anyone drink from me, so I arranged to bring some stored blood along. My work made that part easy. A week later, we met. He invited me to his home, and I, anticipating potential aggression, made sure I was armed. To my surprise, he was a decent enough person for a blood-hungry psychopath. He seemed to appreciate the blood I brought more than the conversation, but soon we found common ground. As he spoke, I realized how similar we were. Both of us, he and I, had become numb to emotions, longing for something beyond the dullness of life. He confessed that the only thing that brought him any semblance of joy was the high from feeding. I could relate. My own existence was consumed by anxiety, a gnawing emptiness that no amount of time or effort could fill. It was a moment of rare understanding. He had burned every bridge in his life as I had, all for the pursuit of something he could no longer name. A vicious cycle of despair. But unlike me, he had nothing left to fight for, no vengeance to crave. He was nothing more than a hollow shell, existing only to feed, to survive. From this brief encounter, I learned more than I could have hoped. These creatures were not only solitary, they could enter a state of hibernation, sometimes for years, in order to survive on a diet of blood and flesh. The one thing that kept them functioning was their strange ability to remain dormant when there was no prey. But the most important discovery: these beings rarely ventured far from their original hunting grounds unless necessary. They would remain close to where they had first been infected, living off the few they could find until, like animals, they migrated elsewhere. My obsession, however, only deepened after this encounter. I was now more certain than ever that I could find him, the one who had destroyed my life. The man who had ravaged my family, whose dark presence had haunted my every waking moment. Finally, I returned to the village where I was born, the place where it all began, where my innocence had been stolen. It was night, the perfect time to strike. But as I gazed down at the village, memories long buried began to resurface, each one more haunting than the last. The man was there too, lurking in the shadows, his presence a dark stain on everything I had once known. I followed the pull of fate, letting the red thread of destiny guide me to him. And there, in a secluded den by the cemetery, I found him, the monster. It was strange, though. The man I had feared for so long was not as imposing as I remembered. He wasn't even that tall. In fact, he was probably not much older than I was when he first ruined everything. My mind had warped my memories. The terror I had felt for so long seemed almost absurd now. He lay there, motionless, vulnerable, pathetic. He looked so small, so weak in that moment. And yet, as I stood there, part of me hesitated. I had the power now. He was helpless at my feet, and yet I couldn't pull the trigger. I had spent so many years consumed by vengeance, yet I knew in that instant that killing him would do nothing. It wouldn't bring my family back. It wouldn't undo the years of pain. It wouldn't fix me. I would feel nothing. The emptiness would remain. Instead, I took his blood, a final act of defiance, and perhaps a desperate attempt to ease my own suffering. I thought that consuming it might offer a release, something permanent to end the torment I had carried for so long. I drank it, expecting to feel the disease take over my body and